Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Tip of the Ice-Burgh podcast, your home for Pittsburgh Penguins news and analysis. You can find us on YouTube at Tip of the Ice-Burgh. Make sure that you like, share, subscribe, all that fun stuff, or you can catch us absolutely anywhere you get your podcast from. I'm your host, Nick Belsky, joined as always by Nick Horwat, and let us be among the last to wish you a happy 4th of July if you're listening in the United States, or a happy Canada Day if you're listening north of the border. We got plenty to discuss today surrounding the Pittsburgh Penguins. First and foremost, a top NHL insider weighs in on the Crosby trade rumors that have kicked up over the last couple of weeks. The Penguins youth movement is being accelerated at the goaltending position, and there are a bunch of fresh faces headed to Pittsburgh after the first week of free agency. Let's get started on the tip of the iceberg. And let's kick things off with a storyline that really has been a non-storyline, and yet it continues to get more and more traction because it just comes up now. It seems like clockwork every 3 or 4 months. We have this rush of national and or Canadian national media that want to talk about Sidney Crosby forcing his way out of the city of Pittsburgh. Now, the Crosby trade rumors this time kicked up around the NHL draft, and mainly because of the reporting of one Kevin Weeks of ESPN. But Elliot Friedman of 32 Thoughts, the podcast and Sportsnet, well, he weighed in on their season finale episode on Sunday morning, saying, quote, "One of the things I was told is that Crosby hates it when this stuff starts, and it actually makes it harder to convince him to do anything. So if you actually want Crosby to leave, don't talk about it." So you know what we're going to do, Horwat? We're going to talk about it because we are a Pittsburgh Penguins-based podcast. And the question that I have for you out of all of this, because again, it is a non-story in our eyes, and it always has been, but will the national media or the Canadian media ever let this one go?
It's tough to say if they will ever let it go, because it is an eye catcher. Just discussing it one way or the other, there's no doubt about it. It's one of the biggest names in the sport, one of the most successful names in the sport, and kind of his stubbornness with change, and that kind of taking the driver's seat in this, and that he's not going to go anywhere. I think he has said, as plain as he will say, he doesn't want to go anywhere. I don't think he's going to too often, or at least it doesn't seem like he'll outwardly say, "Hey, I'm staying put no matter what." The words "no matter what" has never been uttered, I think. But the fact that his agent finally came out and said something along the lines of "it's all nonsense." Now Friedman adding in this idea that the more you discuss it, the less he will actually consider it. Not that he's ever going to consider it anyway, but the more that it happens, it is more of a, hey, stop, just stop from Crosby. So I don't know if the medias around the North Americas will ever stop with the Crosby trade conversation. It gets the views. I get it, but they just continue to add it on in every little way they can. Watching TSN is a nightmare anymore when it comes to just the topic of free agency and trades, and then somehow Sid's name floats in there, and it's very unfun watching professionals in the media industry and then former players who know better to continue spewing it.
Yeah, it's funny because nothing in sports is guaranteed. And now I've said on this podcast before, because again, like I mentioned, this has been a story before, and it's been shut down before by multiple different people, including Sidney Crosby himself on a couple of occasions. But I did say on this show before that there's no chance in hell that Sidney Crosby ever goes anywhere. Maybe that's a bit of an exaggeration. I'd say maybe it's 95%, but I'm never going to say never to something like this. But here's the thing. You already mentioned Sidney Crosby himself has said it a million times. His agent, Pat Brisson, has now weighed in on this most recent slew of trade rumors and said that there's nothing to it. Not only that, the guy signed a 2-year contract last August. It's not like he hasn't re-upped or kind of committed himself to the Penguins organization while they were in the midst of this downturn, while they were in the midst of this bottom falling out. Now, yes, last year was way worse than it had been the 2 previous years. But I think Crosby himself knew the direction the team was going in before he signed that 2-year extension. And yet, he signed it with a smile on his face, and he was happy to sign it at an $8.7 million cap hit. Now, like I said, things can change, but there has been no indicator whatsoever that anything has changed. So I'm not sure, again, where all of this is coming from. Sidney Crosby is a guy that has, over his entire lifetime, has seemed to be very committed to where he's at. He loves where his feet are planted, and his feet have been firmly planted in the city of Pittsburgh for 20 plus years now. Doesn't seem like that's going to change. Not to mention the fact that he's an incredibly loyal human being, and even taking out the Penguins aspect of it, do we really think he's going to force his way out in the final year of his best friend's career? At least one of his best hockey friends, I should say. His career in Evgeny Malkin. It makes no sense as to why these have been brought up once again, and why they'll probably be brought up again in September when training camp opens up.
Yeah, they're going to continue to be brought up. It is just the world we live in these days. I pondered this not too long ago. The way Sidney Crosby is not likely going to end his career on a bad Penguins team, but it's kind of what it seems if you look at the contract situation and just the direction the Penguins are going. If Mario Lemieux did not own the team, would he have had these sort of conversations? Would he have had to deal with this? Because again, Mario Lemieux at the end of his career, post-comeback, there was a couple of good Penguins teams in there. But if we're blunt, it was those bad Penguin teams, that got Sidney Crosby here in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
But if Lemieux did not own the team, would there be this same sort of hullabaloo? Hey, Mario Lemieux can still cut it. He's one of the greatest of all time. Should he find a new home to end his career? Could Montreal come calling for the end of Mario Lemieux's career? I pondered this to myself not too long ago and, thought nothing of it because, again, it's a bit of an apples to oranges comparison. Like I said, Lemieux owned the team. There's no way he's leaving it.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a little different, but truly, where is it just this new age of media where the click drives everything? Because that is very possible that the fact that TSN as part of their quiz is throwing in the question of, will Sidney Crosby, through a trade or not, be in the playoffs in 2026? And a lot of the yeses were yes, he's going to also request a trade to do it. Like, it's getting a little ridiculous, and
mm-hmm.
it is just getting to that point of, I don't know what it's going to take for these panels to not bring it up.
If Elliot Friedman's comments were truthful, let him keep burning them up, because that's just going to push Sidney Crosby further and further in the opposite direction. So I don't know. Again, it's an interesting storyline that continues to. It's interesting that it continues to come up. Mm-hmm. Not that it's an interesting storyline in general, because we all know that as of this moment, and I said things can change. Tom Brady didn't finish his career as a New England Patriot. Yeah. Aaron Rodgers is a Pittsburgh Steeler. Minkah Fitzpatrick is a Miami Dolphin. Professional sports can get a little wacky sometimes, mm-hmm. but this is one that just feels like, unless something changes, and nothing has happened to indicate that it has to this point, it doesn't feel like Sidney Crosby is finishing his career anywhere else other than the city of Pittsburgh. Now let's talk about who's going to be playing in net for Sidney Crosby and the Penguins this year, because there's one person that certainly won't be, and that is goaltender Alex Nedeljkovic, who was traded to the San Jose Sharks this week in exchange for a 2028 third-round pick. Alex Nedeljkovic came to the city of Pittsburgh 2 years ago in search of a rejuvenation after getting a big contract with the Detroit Red Wings and just crashing and burning in that organization. He comes back to Pittsburgh, and the numbers weren't phenomenal. .898 save percentage, .305 goals against average. His total record was 32, 22, and 12. But what he did do was prove that he could play at the NHL level. And if he has help in front of him, which he didn't have for a large portion of his time in Pittsburgh, he can battle his way to some big-time victories. Look no further than the tail end of his first season with the Penguins, where he narrowly pushed them into the playoffs as the starting goaltender in the month of March. One thing I will say about Alex Nedeljkovic is he seemed to be the consummate professional in a city that kind of moved and shaked him around a little bit because there was so much uncertainty with Tristan Jarry. There were young players coming up on his heels, especially this past season, and guys like Joel Blomqvist. And he seemed to be able to just keep a professional air about him in the locker room, on the ice, and was able to battle the Penguins to some victories over his 2 years. Of course, he's going to have some tremendous moments. Scoring the goalie goal that he was able to score is always going to stick with him and always going to stick with Penguins fans, but he ends his tenure 2 years after it starts in the city of Pittsburgh, and he heads over to the San Jose Sharks. Now, Horwat, you were in that locker room his first year with the Penguins organization. I wanted to get your thoughts on the Penguins trading Ned.
Off the jump, Ned's a great guy. Off the ice, he always seemed like a great person to interact with and talk to. I said on here before, he also always seemed like a player that you can discuss just sports in general. It doesn't have to just be hockey talk with him. He's the one that showed up, the Parm, Ohio native, showing up with a Myles Garrett jersey during Browns week. Good on him for that sort of, boldface to bring out your own fandom into Pittsburgh. And I love things like that. It was so great to see. Always interacting with him was always an awesome moment, always a good experience, always brought good quotes, always brought good answers, and was easy to talk to. As for the player, again, solid player. I hope, for the sake of him and the Sharks, I hope he can lead I know they have Askarov down there kind of as their goalie of the future, but I hope Ned can kind of bridge the gap between where that Sharks team is now, that young, exciting team looking to the future, into something great down the line. I'm excited to see what he can do in San Jose. I know it's a bit of a gong show over there, but they're straightening it out pretty quickly. As Friedman also said in 32 Thoughts, the only team rebuilding in the league right now is the Penguins. So that means the Sharks are, at bare minimum, taking steps forward. And I think Nedeljkovic is going to be, I'm going to say, a pretty big part of it for at least the near future. We'll see what happens a couple years down the line. Like I said, Askarov is there and is supposed to be really darn good. But for now, Ned getting a good deserving call for a likely starter job to at least start the year there.
Yeah, now where does that leave the Penguins goaltending situation? With Alex Nedeljkovic out the door, I think it opens the door for two young Penguins goaltenders that have, in their own times, had some very stellar glimpses over the past couple of seasons. Joel Blomqvist, 2 years ago, lit the world on fire, at least lit the AHL world on fire, looking extremely impressive in his first season at that level. And then last year he gets his first taste of NHL action, I should say, and it didn't go well in his 15 games played. I mean, he had moments again, but the overwhelming sentiment was it didn't feel like he was ready for that level. Now, again, here's the asterisk that we always have to put in front of stuff over the past couple of years with goaltenders is they were playing behind one of the worst defensive hockey teams the National Hockey League had to offer. So you do have to take that into account. But as of right now, after this trade, Blomqvist is the number 2 for the Penguins organization. Then there's a guy like Sergei Murashov, who was absolutely electrifying last year in his first season in North America, a combined record in the ECHL and the AHL of 29, 10, and 1 with a .918 save percentage and a .252 goals against average. He was tremendous in the regular season. Now, he did have a rough postseason, 0-4 combined in both the ECHL and the AHL playoffs. But you look at those two goaltenders, and the Penguins have high hopes for both of them, especially a guy in Sergei Murashov, who you would have to imagine is going to get more playing time at the American Hockey League level. But there is now one less hurdle for them to climb to get NHL ice time. So when you look at the Pens, what do you think about these two young goaltenders and the opportunity that they now have in front of themselves in the 25-26 season?
It could be an entertaining opportunity. I feel like it'll start with Jarry and Blomqvist as the 1-2 just to kind of kick off the season. But it wouldn't be all that shocking to see Murashov maybe get a shot later in the year, depending on the direction of the team, which, as we already know, is not upwards, at least for the time being. So maybe they try and get him some NHL reps just to kind of see what he has. It's not necessarily going to be a, hey, we're throwing you in because of X, Y, and Z because we want to give you a run. No, we just want to see how these steps are being taken and how they might translate at the NHL level. It's going to be a period of experiments, I think, for the goalies, if that's sort of the direction they want to go in. I like what it can do, and I think if you're a team like the Penguins trying not to win, yeah, keeping Jarry around is a pretty good move too. But I think this will be a growing year for both Blomqvist and Murashov. It's just going to be a matter of when it happens for Murashov mostly.
Now you look at that goaltending depth chart, and it's Jarry, Blomqvist, Murashov, and then you also got to throw Philip Larson in there somewhere as well. He had himself a good season with the Wilkes-Barre Penguins last year. The question that now comes up in my mind is, could the Penguins bring in another goaltender, maybe a veteran, in case Joel Blomqvist once again doesn't look like he is prepared for the NHL level and they think he needs a little bit more seasoning again at the American Hockey League level? Do you think that that's on the table for Kyle Dubas and company, is bringing in a veteran goaltender to kind of move around as these young goaltenders start to show you where they're going to be at the start of the season?
I don't hate the idea of a young goalie, or not a young goalie, a veteran goalie to sort of step in and act as a third string almost. I think it'd be a good idea for injury's sake as well, because let's say Jarry does get hurt, and then it is down to your two kids essentially.
Yeah.
And that's crucifixion by fire, or whatever the saying is. I know I said it wrong, but you're throwing them to the wolves, and that's
by fire.
You're throwing them to the wolves, and that's not what
Yeah.
you want to do, at least in Murashov's case. I know you kind of already did that with Blomqvist a little bit last season, and it was through injury that he got put in there. So I could see a veteran goalie coming in and acting as a third string. It has to be one that's perfectly okay with that, though. I don't know too many that are out there. I mean, I haven't pulled up the free agent list, but it's for goalies, it's usually never that long. So
it was thin before July 1st. So it's even more thin now.
Yeah. So that'll be tough to find, but I think Kyle Dubas works in mysterious ways. Maybe he knows a guy who can get him a third string goalie that is willing to sort of play that buffer position.
Yeah. Now, baptism by fire is exactly what you were looking for. But then again, considering what the Penguins defense has looked like the last couple of seasons, crucifixion by fire might not be far off either. But no, I think with Tristan Jarry's future kind of up in the air, he's been talked about in trade rumors a lot, and a lot of the end of those conversations are, but there's not really a market for a goaltender that's played some of the worst hockey he's ever played in his career. And also a goaltender that has a track record of being very good in October, November, and December, but being very bad from that point onward, especially once he gets to the Stanley Cup playoffs. Jarry has 3 years remaining at $5.35 million on his contract. If you're the Penguins, and you kind of alluded to this a little bit earlier, maybe you let Tristan Jarry just be the guy and get Blomqvist the reps when you can, and say, hey, if he succeeds and he's very good, his trade stock goes up, and we can just ship him out and maybe get out from under that contract. If he stinks, well, the odds are getting a little bit better to get Gavin McKenna. So again, I don't know if that's what the plan is, but if that is the plan, it does make some sense, which is having Tristan Jarry take the brunt of the reps as the starting goaltender in Pittsburgh and kind of supplementing him with these young goaltenders as the opportunity arises for them to help them kind of move along and get some tastes of NHL action. Blomqvist, the second time in his career, and potentially guys like Larson and Murashov who will get their first taste.
Yeah, for sure. And it's digging deep a bit, but keeping Gauthier around with an AHL contract could also be beneficial down the line, especially if he keeps up his progression and his pace at the AHL level and becomes a nice, whether it's a trade piece or a piece for the goalie depth down the line. Small piece of business, but one to at least keep a tab on. It's not going to be huge at the moment. It's not going to be cutting edge stuff, but one to keep a tab on looking down the line.
Now let's finish off this episode by looking at the pieces of work that Kyle Dubas was able to get done this week in the first week of Penguins free agency. Exactly what we all kind of expected. Short-term, low-money deals. No one signed over a 2-year contract with the Penguins this past week, and no one got over $2.5 million. In fact, only one player got more than $2 million in general. We'll run down the list here and then talk about some of our biggest takeaways from the first week of free agency. Two guys re-upping with the Penguins, Phil Tomasino and Connor Dewar, each get a one-year deal. Tomasino gets $1.75 million. Connor Dewar gets 1.1. Justin Brazeau, the forward, gets 2 years, $1.5 million. Caleb Jones, a left shot defenseman, gets 2 years, $900,000. Philip Kemp, a right shot defenseman, gets 2 years, $775,000. Raphael Harvey-Pinard, who is a forward, gets a 1 year, $775K. And left-handed defenseman Alexander Alexiev gets a 1 year, $775K contract. And then there's the two bigger names, the names that you might have recognized, which is Parker Wotherspoon, a left shot defenseman, gets a 2-year contract with the Pens at $1 million even. And then Anthony Mantha, coming off of a ACL injury, gets a 1-year contract, kind of a prove-it deal after that ACL injury, $2.5 million, the richest man of the Penguins free agent class in 2025. So Horwat, with that being said, you heard the list. What were your biggest takeaways from week one of free agency in 2025?
It was nothing splashy, and it was just as we expected. It was guys that are going to plug holes. They're going to just fill up lineup spots, and they're going to do their job, and then we'll see what comes of certain names down the line in terms of trade bait, in terms of pieces for the future. Trying to look at ages for some of those guys. If
they're all in the 20s.
Yeah, if anyone could be, who of them could be around a couple years down the line, like an Alexiev, who I like that pickup a lot. I really do. Especially on a 1-year deal. If he proves it, if he does well, extend that man, not deep into the future, but a couple years at a time, see what's next for him. Everyone liked the Wotherspoon signing right off the jump, and I think for a good reason. And for what it's worth, don't look at daily face-off for the lines right now, because it really is. It's a guessing game. I do like the idea of the top six at least, but we're here to talk about defense for a split second. Owen Pickering on the first line, eh?
Hey.
It's gonna be an interesting preseason training camp, and then we'll see what happens. Also, it wasn't a free agent signing, but I like the Connor Clifton pickup as well.
Yeah. Now I did lie. Anthony Mantha is 30 years old, but sorry.
That's all right. That's one of those. If he comes in and he does well, we reconsider that name come trade deadline.
Again, 1-year deal at $2.5 million. Now, my biggest takeaway is Jason Spezza does not lie. While everybody and their mother has said the Penguins are going young, right? We had that quote from the Josh Yohe article a couple weeks ago where we don't know how good the Penguins are going to be, but they're going to be as good as their young guys make them. While I think they want to go young, let's not forget what Jason Spezza said last year whenever he was on the broadcast on Sportsnet Pittsburgh. They will not rush prospects, particularly their best prospects. They are going to wait until they are, quote, ready to come up and stay up at the NHL level. That means if a guy like Tristan Brose is not quite ready, they're not going to just throw him into the fire. If a guy like Ville Koivunen needs a little bit more seasoning, they're not going to bring him up and say, hey, full 82, let's see how you do. Same has to ring true for a guy you just mentioned in Owen Pickering. That's where I think a lot of these guys come into play. That, yes, is it more exciting to watch Caleb Jones on the left side than see what you have in Owen Pickering? It's not. But would you rather make sure Owen Pickering is ready so you can get him to find success than potentially screw up the 2 years, $900,000 contract with Caleb Jones? No. You'd rather be a little bit more careful of the thin layer of prospects you have at the AHL level that are close to getting ready to the NHL level. So I think Spezza's words ring true from last year that they want to go young, but they will not rush their young players and will not bring them up until they believe they are ready to come up and succeed at the NHL level. And that's where a lot of these guys are, is placeholders for those younger players so they don't have to rush them into the lineup. And the other thing that I'll mention is it's a new cast of vets for Wilkes-Barre. You know, a guy like Philip Kemp, a guy like Raphael Harvey-Pinard, a guy like Alexander Alexiev. It feels like, once again, Kyle Dubas and company are saying, we want to make sure that we have the right vets in place to help Wilkes-Barre succeed. They want to have a good system meaning successful teams in the ECHL and the AHL. And I think some of these players, that's where you're going to see them a lot of the times. I mean, a lot of these names remind me of Andreas Janssen. Yeah, could he play at the NHL level? He could. We could see it. But he could also not play a single second of hockey for the Pittsburgh Penguins. It reminds me of a guy last year in Sebastian Aho, who everybody was saying, well, I mean, why did they even pick him up? Is he really going to be a big part of this defense? No, he didn't play a single second for the Penguins at the NHL level that I remember of. I mean, he might have come up in the middle of the season, but I don't believe Sebastian Aho, as I look it up, played at all for the Penguins last year.
No, I don't think he did. I think he was recalled once or twice, but never made it to the lineup. It just could be. I like where your head's at with the placeholder stuff. Also, for what it's worth, Aho could still prove it again this year. He's got another year left on his deal to maybe make that jump, maybe become the call up, maybe become the, hey, I'm stealing a role for next season.
Maybe he's the Taylor Fadoon.
Oh my goodness, exactly. Except he's way younger. But yeah, there are young faces still in the AHL level, and like you said, a new crop of vets to sort of lead a charge. And it's not like they're old vets either. I'm looking at 29-year-olds. I don't see a 30 down here. So that's going to be interesting to see moving forward, at least with the AHL squad, because they want them to be good. They want that team to be good because of first, the morale already seems really high at the AHL level. If it carries over from last year, I think the vibes are already there. Now it is a matter of going on a bit of a playoff run if they can, considering the last 2 years have just fallen well short of what anybody wanted, and just continuing to see success and watch that success breed into the NHL level, because that is the main goal of this, is to see these kids essentially bond, win at the AHL level, or at least show that they can, and then bring it to the NHL level when they're ready and when it's time. It's going to be a lot of fun to continue watching that AHL team grow.
Now, the last thing I will say as far as overall takeaways from this free agent class to this point, the size priority wasn't just a line, right?
Oh.
Brazo is 6'6", going into your bottom six. Anthony Mantha is 6'5". Alexiev, if he does play at the NHL level, 6'4". Kyle Dubas said he wanted to get harder to play against. He wanted to get bigger bodies. Well, those three are skyscrapers compared to what the Penguins have deployed over the last handful of seasons. So you do get a lot of size in those three, and specifically a guy like Anthony Mantha. I really like the risk that you're taking with him. Yeah, he's coming off of a torn ACL, which is going to take away one of his most important assets, which was his kind of plus skating ability for a guy that size. But you take the risk on him, and if it looks like it goes back to normal, you might have a guy that, one, you could either flip and have a lot of, assets coming back the other way, or two, a guy who's 30 years old and you can employ for the next couple of seasons to help bridge that gap to the next, iteration of successful Penguins hockey. If you want to get it by next year, if you want to get it in 2 years' time, a 32-year-old Anthony Mantha, if he's able to bounce back from this and able to kind of be deployed in a way that helps him reach the heights that he was able to his couple of 20-goal seasons with the Detroit Red Wings, it's a nice low-risk, potentially medium-high reward. I'm not going to say it's a crazy high reward. The guy's already 30, and he is coming off the ACL. But you could get a half-decent reward in either a great trade chip or somebody who over the next couple of seasons is going to help you score some goals at the NHL level.
For sure, and that's kind of the baseline objective for him. Prove that you can come back from the injury and take your next steps for your own career. Who knows if it's here? Who knows if it's somewhere else? It'll be interesting and fascinating to watch. I mean, there seems to be a lot of hopes around him. I mean, looking at the deal, it's $2.5 million for the 1 year, but also good number of performance bonuses in there for games played. An extra $250K for every 10 games played this season. That'll be a fascinating thing to keep an eye on as well. So depending on how much the Penguins want to throw money out, that's an extra, couple million that could be heading his way as well.
Yeah, so all in all, again, I think we've iterated this a couple times. This was not a surprising free agent class at all. The most surprising thing we saw was the trade of Alex Nedeljkovic, and even that, when you look at it, it makes some sense considering where the Penguins are at. If you can get some good value, and listen, a third-round pick is good value for a goaltender that has a sub-900 save percentage over his last 2 seasons. It feels like Kyle Dubas stayed true to the rebuild over the past week as the Penguins free agency began. Now, let's do one last thing that I'm just going to throw at you here. We always like to talk about prospects and where they're going to play. We always want to know, hey, are they coming over to North America? Are they making the jump to professional hockey? Well, we did get a couple of answers courtesy of Matt Wenzel, who was at prospect camp over the last couple of days. He said Melvin Fernstrom expected to go back to Sweden. He said Tanner Howe expected to start this year, as he's also recovering from a torn ACL, with the Wilkes-Barre Penguins and start his journey in professional hockey. And the last one was Michael Ilyin, who was expected to head back to the KHL for the 2025-26 season. So you hear those 3 names, where they're going. Fernstrom going back over to Europe, Ilyin going back over to the KHL, but Tanner Howe coming to the AHL this year. What are your thoughts on those 3?
I don't have too much. I know there's good stuff coming from the prospect camp. It's all looking forward to the future. And hey, however each player decides and however the front office decides is the best way for each of them to continue to elevate, continue to progress. I'm cool with it. And they're all coming off of a pretty big week at the Penguins development camp in terms of, hey, there's 13 new faces here. You're all fighting to kind of not necessarily be the face of the organization going forward, but you're all fighting to become pieces of this bright future that Kyle Dubas and we continue to hype up for the city of Pittsburgh.
Now, the one I'm very excited about is Tanner Howe. He didn't have a great post-draft season last year, dealt with a couple of injuries before being traded to the Calgary Hitmen. And of course, we all know the Penguins drafted Ben Kindle, who was his line mate in Calgary in the first round this year. But I'm excited to see him play some pro hockey. This is a guy that I don't think a lot of people were talking about last year, specifically because he did miss a lot of time with injuries and because he was playing all the way out in Calgary. But I'm excited to see what him and pro hockey looks like together at the AHL level. I mean, last year we got the opportunity to see Tristan Brose play his first complete season in professional hockey. And I'm excited to see, Tanner Howe kind of join that group and see how he assimilates to a game against men, because he's a guy who, while undersized, plays a lot bigger than he is. And I want to see what that looks like in practice. So shout out again to Matt Wenzel of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, who tweeted all that out after he spoke with Penguins personnel today about the futures of those 3 players. And really excited to see where things turn out as all of those prospects return for the Prospects Challenge here in about a month and a half in Buffalo. That's always a fun tournament and always a time that you get to watch and see where these guys are at going into the 25-26 season before they disperse to their various corners of the world.
The Penguins draft class from this past year could put up half of the lineup.
Yeah, just honestly, the first round is probably going to be more than half of the starting lineup.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be fascinating to see sort of what these players look like beginning their mold together, beginning their process of we're growing together as teammates, whether they are, again, set to be Penguins in the future or just muddle around until Kyle Dubas makes a real decision. They're going to be learning each other's ins and outs and seeing how it goes. I can't wait to see how many of those 13 picks make it to that camp, and then seeing how they perform from there is, the Penguins don't have much to watch in terms of NHL level stuff. If you're a Penguins fan and you're excited about the future, it'll be important to keep an eye on these kids.
And visibility is going to be a big thing with this draft class, because a vast majority of them, if not all of them, I can't remember off the top of my head, because again, there's freaking 13, are either NCAA or CHL players, or USHL as well.
They're all North America. Yeah, there wasn't a single European pick, or at least a single European-based pick.
Yes. So again, you'll have plenty of visibility for a lot of these guys, and it'll be exciting to see how they progress as the summer goes, and then, of course, as their first post-draft season goes as well. But that's going to do it for this episode of The Tip of the Ice-Burgh. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this one. Remember, you can find us on YouTube at Tip of the Ice-Burgh. Make sure that you like, share, subscribe. It's free, doesn't cost you anything, and it helps us out a whole heck of a lot. Or if you prefer an audio version, you can find us absolutely anywhere you get your podcast from. We'll see you guys next time.